Colombia, 1603. Under a violent tropical storm, an African man breaks his chains and disappears into the mangroves. His name is Benkos Biohó, the man who would defy the Spanish Empire and build the first free kingdom in the Americas. In the early 17th century, the city of Cartagena de India stood as Spain's jewel on the Caribbean coast, its golden walls gleaming under a cruel sun, its harbors filled with ships carrying the lifeblood of empire. But beneath that gold, there was rot. Cartagena was also the largest slave port in South America, a city built on the backs of those stolen from Africa. Every week, ships arrived from Guinea, Congo, Angola, dark hulks loaded with human cargo. Men, women, and children were chained in suffocating holds, branded like cattle, and marched through the cobbled streets to be sold. The air reeked of salt, sweat, and despair. Spanish traders called it commerce. The enslaved called it hell. The walls of Cartagena echoed with the crack of whips and the clinking of iron. Under the blinding Caribbean light, Africans worked to build fortresses, repair ships, and harvest sugar for the Spanish crown. Many died within months of exhaustion, of fever, or simply of heartbreak. Those who survived learned the geography of pain, the plantations, the docks, the salt mines, the humid prisons that never slept. Among them was a man named Benkos Biohó, brought from the Mandinga people of West Africa. Back home, he had been a prince, born among warriors and elders who believed that a man's name carried his soul. When he was captured, bound, and thrown onto a slave ship, they tried to erase that name, but he kept it hidden like fire in his chest. In Cartagena, Benkos was forced to labor for Spanish masters who mistook obedience for brokenness. Yet his eyes told another story of a mind that measured distance, watched guards, memorized routes. He carried silence like a weapon, and in that silence, something ancient stirred, the belief that no man could own another's spirit. Each night, as the waves crashed against the city walls, he would look toward the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond those waters lay freedom invisible, but waiting. Benkos Biohó's story began long before Cartagena. In his homeland, near the great rivers of Guinea-Bissau, he had lived as a warrior and a leader, the son of a Mandinga chief. His people traded in gold and salt, sang stories under starlight, and believed that destiny could not be sold. When raiders came, European and African alike, his village burned, his kin were taken, and he was bound in chains. The voyage across the Atlantic was a nightmare carved into eternity. For months, he lay in darkness, chained ankle to ankle, surrounded by the stench of death. The ocean was filled with the bodies of those who had jumped rather than live, enslaved. Yet Benkos endured, whispering to the sea in Mandinga prayers. He promised that if he ever reached land, he would turn captivity into rebellion. In the New World, he became property, a body without a name. His captors beat him, starved him, and tried to strip away memory. But each lash only reminded him of the oath he had made. My freedom will not die in chains. Other Africans saw something unbroken in him. They whispered of the tall man with sharp eyes who walked like a king even in rags. He spoke to them in secret, teaching them words of resistance, of home, of courage. In a land where everything was forbidden, hope, language, faith, he began to rebuild all three. Every stolen day was a rehearsal for escape. Every wound was a map. And when the rain came, drumming on the roofs of Cartagena, Benkos listened not to the storm, but to the rhythm of the chains he would soon shatter. It began on a night drowned in thunder. The year was 1599, and Cartagena slept under heavy rain, its torches dimmed by the storm. Within a small storage hut near the docks, Benkos Biohó waited, wrists raw from iron, heart steady as a drum. Around him were his wife, his children, and 10 others who had chosen freedom over life. They had been preparing for months. Each tool, each rumor of guard rotations, each stolen moment was a thread in their plan. When the storm arrived, it was like the sea itself had agreed to help them. The gods took shelter. The dogs went silent under the downpour. With a shard of iron, Benkos cracked the lock that had chained him for years. The sound was swallowed by thunder. They ran barefoot through the mud, breathless, every flash of lightning revealing the walls they were leaving behind, the prison that had called itself a city. They crossed the marshlands of Bokila, wading waist-deep through black water that smelled of salt and decay. Mosquitoes swarmed, snakes moved underfoot, and hunger gnawed at them. But the fear of capture was worse. Behind them, Cartagena's bells began to toll the alarm of a slave revolt. Days turned to weeks. The fugitives lived off roots, crabs, and river water, sleeping in trees to avoid wild beasts and soldiers. One by one, some grew weak. Yet Benkos refused to stop. "We die here as free people," he told them, "or we live as ghosts in chains." At last, they reached the deep jungles south of Cartagena, a maze of rivers, mangroves, and mist. There, the Spanish patrols could not follow. The land itself protected them, thick, humid, alive. Benkos gathered his group beneath a towering ceiba tree and raised his hand to the sky. "This," he said, "is not the end of our flight. It is the beginning of our kingdom." In that moment, drenched and trembling, a new world was born. Deep in the wilderness, far from the chains of Cartagena, Benkos Biohó and his followers built something that had never existed in the Americas, a free African nation. They called it San Basilio de Palenque, the palisade of freedom. Around their small huts of palm and mud, they planted corn, cassava, and beans. They hunted wild pigs, fished the rivers, and learned to melt iron into blades. Every sunrise, drums echoed through the trees, the same rhythm once heard on African coasts. In the center of the village stood a wooden post where the chains of their escape hung like trophies. It was both a warning and a promise: we will never wear them again. The community grew. Runaways from plantations and galleys began arriving, exhausted, wounded, but alive. Some came from hundreds of miles away, guided only by whispered rumors. In the jungles beyond Cartagena, there is a king who broke his chains. Benkos became both leader and protector. He taught his people to fight, as the forest fights silently, invisibly, striking and vanishing. When the Spanish sent soldiers, they were ambushed in swamps. When they burned crops, new ones sprouted in hidden clearings. The palenqueros carved messages in trees, used coded songs to warn of danger, and built lookout towers disguised as huts. For every life taken, Benkos vowed 10 new lives would be freed. Within a few years, San Basilio became a legend, a living rebellion. To the enslaved, it was paradise. To the Spanish, it was blasphemy. And in the humid heart of the jungle, the fire of freedom burned, fed by courage, guarded by silence, and lit by a man who refused to kneel. Spain had conquered kingdoms, crushed rebellions, and claimed continents in the name of its crown. But what frightened it most was an idea, the idea that enslaved people could live free, govern themselves, and fight back. And that idea had a name: Benkos Biohó. When reports reached the Spanish governors that hundreds of Africans were gathering under his banner, they called him El Rey Negro de los Montes, the Black King of the Mountains. His palenque, hidden among rivers and dense forest, was said to be protected by spirits. Soldiers sent to destroy it often vanished into the swamps, never to return. In 1605, the Spanish mounted their largest expedition yet. Hundreds of armed men marched through the jungle, led by dogs and scouts. But the land itself betrayed them. Their boots sank into mud, their muskets jammed in the rain. When night fell, the darkness belonged to Benkos. His warriors struck like shadows, swift, silent, merciless. They used bamboo spears, poisoned arrows, and knowledge of every hidden trail. To the sound of drums and thunder, they attacked from the trees, vanishing before the enemy could fire a shot. By dawn, the Spanish line had collapsed. The jungle was littered with armor and bodies, the survivors dragging themselves back to Cartagena. Word spread like fire. The king of the Palenque could not be defeated. His people began forging their own identity, no longer slaves, but palenqueros, the free children of the forest. But even as victory shone, Benkos knew war could not last forever. Freedom was not only won by blades, it had to be recognized. And so, the warrior prepared to become something else: a diplomat. Benkos Biohó was no mere rebel. He was a strategist who understood that power was not just taken by force, it was maintained through recognition. By 1612, his raids had exhausted the Spanish garrisons. They could not defeat him, and he could not afford endless war. So he did the unthinkable. He demanded a treaty. Representatives from Cartagena rode into the jungle under white flags, uneasy among the trees that had swallowed their armies. There, they found Benkos, waiting not in chains, but on a carved wooden seat, surrounded by his council. He was dressed in a red cloth, his spear laid beside him like a scepter. He spoke calmly: "We want peace, but not submission. We will live free, or we will die free." The Spanish, desperate to end the bloodshed, agreed. The Treaty of 1613 recognized the independence of San Basilio de Palenque and granted freedom to its inhabitants. It was the first legal recognition of an autonomous community of formerly enslaved people in the Americas. For a moment, history bent toward justice. Benkos walked openly through Cartagena, trading goods, meeting merchants, and speaking with priests. Some saw him as a curiosity, others as a threat, dressed in diplomacy. He moved among his former captors with the quiet dignity of a man who knew that freedom could not be revoked by paper. He had built something greater than a refuge, a symbol. But symbols have power, and power terrifies empires. Behind the governor's smiles, plans were already forming. The Spanish could not tolerate a black king walking their streets unshackled. The peace Benkos forged would soon become the trap that ended his life. For a few brief years, the treaty held. Trade routes opened between Cartagena and San Basilio. Markets exchanged food, cloth, and iron tools. To outsiders, it seemed as though the Spanish had accepted peace, but beneath the polished words of diplomacy, resentment festered. The Spanish elite of Cartagena whispered, "A black king walking among us, speaking as an equal." To them, Benkos was not a diplomat but an insult carved into the empire's pride. The idea of freedom spreading to other plantations terrified them more than any sword. In 1619, a new governor arrived, Don Garcia Giron, a man known for cruelty disguised as faith. He saw Benkos not as a leader but as a threat to the very order that kept the colonies in line. So he set a trap. Under the guise of renewing peace, he invited Benkos to Cartagena for talks. Messengers carried words of friendship, blessings from priests, and promises of trade. Against the warnings of his council, Benkos accepted. "If I refuse," he said, "they will call us rebels again. If I go, perhaps we keep our peace." When he entered the city, people lined the streets. Some watched in awe, others in silence, knowing betrayal was near. In the plaza, soldiers waited in shadows. The moment Benkos stepped forward to greet the governor, the command was given. Swords flashed, chains clattered. The man who had once broken his shackles was shackled again, this time by deceit. He was dragged through the same streets where he had once been sold, his people forced to watch. Thrown into the fortress prison, Benkos refused to kneel. A Spanish guard later recalled, "He did not weep nor beg. He said only, 'You may bind my hands, but not my spirit. Freedom cannot be caged.'" In the darkness of his cell, the drums of Palenque still echoed in his mind, the rhythm of his people still dancing, still free in the forest. And though his body was trapped, his rebellion was already immortal. On the 16th of March, 1621, as dawn bled over Cartagena, crowds gathered in the Plaza Mayor. Soldiers erected a wooden scaffold, ropes swaying in the morning wind. The air smelled of fear and salt. Benkos Biohó, bound but unbroken, was led through the square. His hair had turned gray, his skin marked by the iron of years, but his eyes still burned. Some said he smiled when he saw the gallows. A priest offered him confession. Benkos refused. "I confess nothing," he said. "I came into this world free, and I leave it the same." Before the crowd, the governor read his sentence: rebellion, heresy, treason. The words echoed like mockery. Yet even among the Spaniards, a few bowed their heads. They knew they were killing more than a man, they were silencing an idea. When the rope tightened around his neck, Benkos looked toward the distant jungles. Somewhere beyond those walls, his people were still alive, still free. His last words were carried by the wind. "Tell my children the forest remembers." The trapdoor opened. Silence fell. But death did not claim victory. That night, when Spanish soldiers cut his body into pieces and displayed them on the gates of Cartagena, the drums of Palenque began to sound again. In the jungle, warriors painted their faces with ash and swore oaths under the moon. "He has not died," they said. "He has returned to the forest." And from that day forward, the Spanish no longer spoke of Benkos Biohó's rebellion as a crime. They spoke of it as a curse, one they could never erase. Decades passed, empires rose, wars burned across continents, but deep in the Colombian forest, San Basilio de Palenque endured. The Spanish destroyed, rebuilt, and renamed countless towns, but they could never erase this one. The people of Palenque lived as their ancestors had dreamed, self-governed, self-defended, self-defined. They spoke a unique tongue, lengua palenquera, a fusion of Spanish and Bantu that carried the memory of Africa inside every word. Their drums became their history books, retelling the escape of Benkos, the betrayal, the vow of freedom. In the rhythm of the marimbula and tambor, the story never died. When Spain's empire finally crumbled, Palenque remained. It had survived colonial wars, disease, and isolation, outliving its oppressors by centuries. By the 20th century, historians began to call it the first free black town in the Americas. Anthropologists came searching for traces of rebellion, but found something greater: continuity. Old men told stories of Rey Benkos, the king who could not be killed. They said his spirit lived in the ceiba trees and in the storms that rolled over the jungle each year. During festivals, when thunder struck, people would smile and whisper, "Benkos is walking again." In 2005, UNESCO recognized San Basilio de Palenque as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The town still beats with the same pulse of resistance. Its songs, its rituals, its language all descended from that first night of escape in 1599. To this day, children grow up hearing the tale of a man who refused to kneel. They learn that freedom is not something granted by kings, but something built with courage, guarded by memory, and passed on through generations. For the modern world, Benkos Biohó is more than a revolutionary. He is a symbol of what survival looks like when hope seems impossible. His name bridges two continents, Africa and the Americas, and two worlds, bondage and liberation. He proved that history's greatest empires could be undone by a man with no army, no gold, only conviction. And in the quiet rain that falls each year over Cartagena, his spirit still whispers through the mangroves. Chains can rust, freedom cannot. Benkos Biohó left no monument, no crown, no marble tomb. What he left was an idea that dignity can bloom even in mud, and freedom can be carved out of fear. 4 centuries later, his story still stands as a warning to tyrants and a prayer to the oppressed. He turned captivity into a kingdom. He turned pain into purpose. And when the drums of Palenque echo through the rainy nights of Colombia, it is not mourning they carry. It is the heartbeat of a man who proved that no empire can bury freedom.